Can we rock and roll, Lee?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We're extremely excited to have Scott, Paul, and Lee Taman, who will be joining us in a couple of minutes, online to discuss fractionalisation, where the markets are going, and marketplaces in general. As normal, I'm going to be in the background making sure that our panelists answer your questions. So anything that you have, please pop into the chat box or the question box. And please let us know where you're joining us from today. We know that it's an unusual time for a webinar as WealthE Migrate goes, but we are excited that we could get these gentlemen into a room to really share with you and pass on their knowledge. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Scott and Paul, who will take you through what's going to happen today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lee. Thanks for setting it up. I appreciate it a lot. So just a simple one. You know, Lee Taman is a investor of ours, a shareholder of ours, and very vocal on the whole cryptocurrency, blockchain, exponential technology space. And one of the conversations him and I were having was around, you know, where are marketplaces going? Where is property going? You know, and what impact is blockchain going to have, and the whole fractionalisation. And what's interesting to me is that this is a space that Paul not only has a huge amount of experience in, but is also very passionate about. And what's been so interesting is that Paul and I have been having one-to-one conversations on the other side, where he's like, this is really pumping. There's a huge amount of this happening in Australia. It's got huge momentum at the moment. And so I thought to myself, well, you know, and I said to Paul and Lee, would you mind if we did a conversation between the two of them? And equally, we share it just with our inner tribe. So our inner circle, our paid for members, and our shareholders. Because really, quite frankly, there's so much valuable IP here. This is not something you want to be giving away. You only want this to be internal value. So that was really the context of how this came about. The reason it's at 10 a.m. in the morning is that Paul is in Brisbane, and he doesn't like getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning, or whatever reasonable time it was. So it was just a dual time for Lee and Paul that made sense. And for those of you that have joined us, I just wanted to put one prefix on it. And Paul and I were talking earlier before the webinar. In 2017, you know, when I first found out about blockchain in probably 2014, 2015, I realized that this was where the world's going. You know, our biggest challenge is trust. And blockchain ultimately creates a foundation of trust. And you know, this is not necessarily about blockchain, but the point being is that, and then in 2016, 2017, there was this whole rise of cryptocurrencies, and you know, there was a lot of excitement around it, and new funding models and everything else. And we, you know, we got actively involved in it because I fundamentally believe that in the next 10 years, and again, I look forward to what Lee and Paul are going to say, it's not a case of if, it's just a case of when. But what I also learned was the unintended consequences. And so sometimes the more traditional people are, you know, if you get a little bit too edgy towards the future, they think you've completely lost it and gone off and lost focus on where your business is going, and you know, you kind of lose credibility actually. And so I just wanted to put a prefix today that we are visioneering in terms of where the future's going, but it doesn't mean that we're not using focus on how to build a business in today's reality with, you know, making revenue and traditional kind of business decisions. And I wanted to be very clear on that up front, because the unintended consequence in 2017 and the feedback we had from a lot of our shareholders and investors was that we've gone from a kind of a traditional investment marketplace to this new age gadget that no one understands. And what we're trying to do today is more like, you know, a Tesla demonstration where there's Tesla cars, they're working, and they may be doing a demo on flying cars that might or might not be coming in the next 5 to 10 years. And with that, Paul, over to you. And just sorry, Paul, just before I hand to you, Lee, you didn't hear my intro. I'm just going to repeat what I said. I just said Lee's been an active investor and shareholder in our group, and he's very active in the crypto block space, and has a lot of experience and understanding around it. But more importantly, also had concerns around where's the world going, what does this fractionalisation mean? And Paul's very passionate about it. And so today, you know, my invitation to the two of them was, why don't we get Paul to talk about it, and then almost create a Q&A so people can learn from it. Back to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I suppose I've prepared this pretty much from an Australian context or a global context, because it's not, I haven't done this as I hope Wealth Migrate will be, or where they're going, or what they're doing. And so let's, are you okay if we start straight into this, Lee? Is that good with you?
Didn't seem to.
Lee Taman has joined us. I think might be confused as to which Lee you're referring to, but Lee Taman, we're handing over to you.
But yeah, I just wondered if he,
Very unusual for us to have two leads on a webinar when there's only 4 people. Yeah, I think Paul rock and roll. I think he's struggling to connect with his voice. So
if you could enable me to share my screen, and then we'll go.
Yeah, Lee will do that. Lee?
You should be able to share now. Sorry, Paul.
So, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yep. We've got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's good. We can see that.
Yep, good to go.
So, just to give you a bit of background, when the global financial crisis came along, I was running an ASX listed company. Crowdfunding didn't really exist, and I got a call from a mate who said, look, with this crisis, my turnover's dropped from 400,000 a month to 80. We've got 23 employees. We have to cut it down to 4. If you could come in as a short-term gig and sort this out and make it run at plus minus 0, then that would be good. And it lasted about 8 years because I fell in love with the industry and suddenly found out that what we were doing was crowdfunding, and the first equity crowdfunding platform in the world. So what happened then was people like the SEC in America and FINRA and the Canadian regulators and the Singaporean, Malaysian regulators, the Thai, different countries asked me to come and talk to them about how we could have run a platform, had 300 raises, raised 150 million, and had no examples of you know, crime and things like that. And that platform was called ASOB. And that led me to this fractionalisation journey where it was consulting to other platforms, allowing multiple people who wouldn't ordinarily invest in an opportunity to invest. And that's where I met up with Wealth Migrate. That still is more on the traditional fractionalisation route, even though there was a coin created, but the promise of fractionalisation was there, but it was disturbed because of the ICOs. And if you look at this particular graph, the economic reaction of people get excited in the beginning, and they got really excited, and it goes down into a trough, and where people start gathering things together and start moving it forward. And I believe we're gradually exiting that trough in terms of the fractionalisation, tokenization area at the moment. And if you look at this is stolen from Willem's slides, which you may have seen, but this is what he shows is in the difference between 1900 and 1930 in Fifth Avenue in New York. And what was interesting about that is that what it's meant to show is that on one of the slides there are lots of horses and carriages, on the other ones there's lots of cars. And what you think about it in terms of the saddlery days, the people with the horses and carts and that, there were people that made saddlers and working, and look at all the tools and things they had. And not only that, they had that kinesthetic connection with horses, and they loved them. And so they were that type of craftsman or person that did that. And so back at that time, if you can see that one little car is in there, the one in the red circle back in there, and then just a few years later, it was exactly the opposite, in which you had one horse and cart, and then you had all of those cars, which was, you know, it was a transition over a period of time, because different people builds cars than builds, you know, the saddles and the horse and buggy and things like that. And so when you think about it, you know, when did the saddler actually realize that the game was over, or that they could change? And as Willem said, is that when the engine came, when the assembly line came, as the petroleum industry came, or when the first car, or even the millionth car. And if you look at that, that photo was 2013, and you think 1913, and then Ford rolled the millionth car off the line in 1915. So probably there was about 1 million cars at that stage when that last picture was taken. And so you sort of think, when you get to 1913, 1915, what was the saddler thinking? What were they thinking about their particular lifestyle? And I'd just like to contrast that with the real estate agent and the traditional, the intermediaries that are involved in property transactions, that we're sort of heading towards that same thing again, where we see the traditional real estate with who gradually are moving towards some degree of computerization, away from the Rolodex. They're gradually using websites to market their goods and wares, to where you've got other things that have been emerging, like have they actually reacted to the blockchain, smart contracts, the fractionalization of real estate, to the tokenization of property titles, income streams from property or loans from property? And that's what's interesting, that there is all these changes going around. And when do we get to 1915, or that millionth car, or to that area where it is going to be material? And to me, that's the contrast is very much like this, between the craftsman making the carriages and the things, and then the real estate agent thinking, right, how am I going to use all my tools and that to compete with where we're going? And I believe that in the intermediaries of real estate, we're down in that trough, and we're just heading up again, because the peak was of madness. And if you look in Australia and over the world, that like we do have property platforms here, and ones that are fractionalized down to bricks and things like that. Like in Reno in the United States, they tokenized $105 million worth of commercial real estate. And so the market is growing, and they expect by 2027 it'll be around 860 billion. So the fractional property crowdfunding is very much a growth sector. And what's more is that COVID is actually accelerating this transformation, because of course people are having to do things more digitally, more from home. They have to communicate in different ways. They can't be out there with people all the time. And what tends to be more likely to be fractionalized are often things with good income streams, long-term leasehold, medical centers, disability accommodation, commercial buildings, new projects, land banking, things that people can see a good upside about. So you look at all this and think, well, what actually happened in all this? Because a few years ago, there was lots of people going on about, you know, the legal nature and financial nature of tokens and how they're good and people should exist. But when the hype pulled down, people actually started thinking, right, but, you know, have I got a legal right to something? I bought this, but what am I actually getting? And so in reality, who needs tokens that don't have legal rights and obligations? So the adoption of tokenization and financial instruments and things is still early days, and regulators and regulatory frameworks around the world are rapidly adapting to embrace and foster the continued development of them. But of course, they're very slow with the innovation of it. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. So you think, well, what are the next steps there? Well, the next step is going to be really critical to the broader adoption of it. And technology is facilitating it. And the promised benefits of this is only going to be fully realized when the stakeholders, the people that are involved in all of these transactions, work together and build an ecosystem that's really going to be greater than the sum of the parts. And you sort of think, oh, okay, but you know, the land registry and the land title registry is owned by the government. How is that going to work? Because, you know, you can create tokens that represent a flock of sheep, but they don't require official registration. So that's fine. You can build a blockchain thing for sheep. You can put them on there and everything like that. But you can't really create rights, you could say, that are recognized by government on a blockchain for your car and your boat and your house and things like that, because it's really just going to end up being a toy token with no connection with your legal right, because that right lives within an official state-owned registry. And in most countries, registries, especially for land rights, are mandatory, and the regulations do not provide you to use some type of other registry as the primal source. So to enable blockchain technology to replace these traditional registries, the state machine requires reform, and that's unlikely to happen, you know, quickly or in a hurry. So you sort of think, well, without waiting for the governments, what is the pathway? Well, what's more feasible is that the recognition of alternative registers. So citizens themselves can create registers that recognize ownership. In some ways, it's a good example is like if 100 people got together and owned a particular property and had it in SPV, then that title ownership or that registration of it, that can be registered in the blockchain, and then that particular entity is the one that owns, so that they can check that up. So those that are happy with traditional registries and bureaucracy can stay with those, but those who want to use the power of the blockchain, smart contracts, decentralized applications, they can transfer their records from a centralized basis to a ledger. And what's interesting about the blockchain, it actually suits both of the main two types of property registers around the world. Like the American system is a registration of conveyance. It recreates a chain of deeds, and it fits into the blockchain technology, which is based on a familiar chain of transactions. And then the Torrens, which is the system in the Commonwealth uses, is registries in civil law countries, where the registry is designed to track down not deeds, but titles that fit into the concept of, they also fit into the concept of tokens. So tokens on the blockchain enable title-centric type of public registry, and at the same time completely mimic the American type thing, which is a chain or a register of deeds. So you think, well, what can we do with this fractionalization and tokenization? Well, a title token is the record that directly clarifies the property right, the same as a paper title, deeds, or certificate. And that title can represent any right, really, a movable property, cars, boats, corporate rights, property rights, any legal right. And you can certify legal facts and events with it. So it's a digital form of a property record and the primary source of knowledge about property rights, but it's recorded on the blockchain. Now, technology then enables fractional ownership. So that means because you can record so much more, like in Australia, for example, you'd be lucky to get more than about 10 people's names on the title deed for a property. Some states have moved to whereby you're allowed a few more if you've got a digital backup and you continually do. But basically, it's difficult to fractionalize anything more of that. But one of the fractionalization as a, you could say, as a secondary record, and using smart contracts to update that and keep that going means that you can have that power of fractionalization. And the components of tokenization are basically the blockchain technology and smart contracts. And smart contracts can be coded to make sure that you're doing things compliantly, the due diligence is done properly, the KYC, anti-money laundering, and it's streamlined, and listing all the payments are there to be seen in the smart contracts. It means there's more transparency, the decentralized record keeping, and at any time somebody can go in and see the record actually of their transaction. So what I just wanted to give a sort of a thought-provoking overview of this, that fractionalization is, and tokenization is really here to stay. It's something that is gradually being adopted more and more. It's going to be a slow road for some governments. Some governments around the world have shifted to move their title registries and things up, but just like the saddler's tale, in which their job completely changed and their skill types changed, and that I believe the same is going to change very quickly in this total area. And public registers may take a while to change, but other registers will migrate users, and eventually the force of those other registers will demand that the state actually follows key. And it's because people will expect an indelible, transparent, digitized record and contracts on the blockchain. So that sort of gave an overview there, Scott. That's what I wanted to just get across, to get people thinking about it so that they could have some sort of questions and thoughts and that about it. So was that along the lines you were thinking that would be good to get things going?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Paul. I think, what I'd like to do, and if Lee is willing, to talk through his thoughts on where things are going, and equally his concerns, because one of the things, and again, I don't want to put words in Lee's mouth, but what I think Lee is concerned about, and or other people, is that you've got Uber as a platform to keep it simple, and if you suddenly got blockchain and fractionalization and tokenization, does it not dismediate? Is that a word? I can't think of the right word, but sorry,
disintermediate. Disintermediate.
Intermediate. I knew I was missing a part of the word. The platform in itself. Lee, I don't know if you can talk now, but I'd love to do you want to add a bit more color to that, to your concern, and then Paul can answer what his thoughts on. We've lost him again. Yeah, so Paul, I don't know if you want to. Sorry, Lee's in Swaziland, so clearly there's not great internet in Swaziland. But do you want to try and paint some color to that, or actually, I'd probably prefer we try wait for Lee to rejoin us. If anyone's got any questions or anything, please fire them through in terms of everything else. Paul, I think the question I'll have, and I want to come back to the question for Lee, because that was his primary question, was one of the things that I saw in 20 found interesting was that you had all these ICOs and tokenization and everything, and they were going to blockchain deeds offices, and and they raised quite a lot of money, $15 million plus generally. Multiple companies did it. And then I'd go and meet a lady. I met this one lady in San Francisco, and she never even left the west coast of America, but yet she was going to blockchain the whole world and every deeds office in the world. And her story was good because she raised $1 million or something. But what fascinated me is that I tried to bring crowdfunding into South Africa. I know you've tried to bring it in all over the world. And there was such fierce resistance from regulators. And that's not even their deeds office. That's like the primary asset of every country. How do you see the evolution working between regulation, technology, and also local country myopics, where, again, this lady was like, I'm gonna blockchain every deeds office in the world. And I was like, good luck with that. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the thing that people have realized now, that you can have a good argument about something, you can believe it's the best thing since sliced bread, but you're not going to change a deeds office or some government establishment. What you've got to do is build the supporting systems that, like, as I said before, if you've got 100 owners that own a particular type of property, you can record all their registered details on the blockchain. You can link it back to the titles. You can do all those things so they can go there and see what their ownership is. And it can be linked to a traditional record somewhere so people can see where that is. But to try and change the government departments is very, very difficult. So I think that the hype got so strong that people believed that they could change not only government departments and a whole other things, but you actually do have to have a vested interest in what you're going to change. You have to be the one that actually control that particular register, and you make the decision to change it and to upgrade it to work on the blockchain, because you can't just randomly try to change what other people do. And that was the difficult. They were great ideas and people bought them, and because people were naive, they didn't realize that these people never had a possibility to change that.
Yeah. Lee, how you doing, mate?
How's it, guys? Sorry, I'm technologically challenged, it seems.
No worries. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm just going to repeat the question that I heard from you, which was disintermediation, and with sort of fractionalisation and blockchain and all of the likes. Do you, I think your concern was, do you see them disintermediating platforms and marketplaces at large as well? I don't know if you want to paint some color or context to that, and then Paul can give his thoughts on what he thinks.
So, my concerns come from sort of a few different areas. I think that the idea that deeds will move onto the blockchain, I think, is inevitable, but we can debate the timing on it. I think governments exist through the collection of funds and for the collection of funds, regardless of what they may say. They may talk about welfare, but quite honestly, they're just interested in how to collect money. So putting deeds onto a blockchain and allowing transfers through smart contracts would automate the collection of those funds. So I see that as enough motivation for that process to continue. And then, that being accepted, I see something that Willem spoke about recently. 9 out of 10 new businesses fail. 7 out of those 9 fail because of a lack of access to marketplace. Now, we have a UEVP around giving people investment opportunities like the 1% wealthiest or the 1% of people with the best access. Now, in reality, tokenization will allow absolute access to any property in the world very, very simply. So, reading up about the companies that have already started to look at the tokenization of real estate, it seems to me that their greatest challenge is exactly access to the market. So how does Wealth Migrate become that marketplace? You know, how does Wealth Migrate, if you've got all these businesses around the world tokenizing real estate, how does Wealth Migrate become the marketplace that everybody is drawn to trade those tokens? You know, how do we become the access to marketplace that causes 7 out of 10 businesses to fail?
Yeah, so did you want me to have a go at that, Scott?
Paul, very much so. I think you're the expert in this space, huh?
Yeah, well, I suppose whether or not it's tokenization or fractionalisation, I guess that somebody at some stage has to actually be the driver in fractionalising a particular building, because I'm sure there's lots of them that will be 100% owned or 50% owned or something like that. And then you get down to how would those ones be marketed on what type of platforms? And I think Lee's right. It's not clearly defined as it was with the automobile industry. It moved from craftsman to mass production to motor dealerships, and you know how that actually will play out. But for a long time in the future, I guess the portions of real estate will have to be sold through some or marketed by some sort of mechanism from people that either have got a base of investors, or they've got the licenses to market and things like that. Where it ends up though, where Lee was saying that perhaps, you know, when everything is fractionalized and everything is recorded in the title deed offices, how will you do that? Will it just be like going on to, well, not necessarily eBay, but onto somewhere where you just grab what you want? It's going to be interesting. So I don't really have an answer for that. I just know that with fractionalization, there still has to be matchmaking somewhere, and you can't just sort of search around and find fractions yourself of something. Somebody has to stand there who you respect and trust and guides you to say, like, okay, you're looking for this. Our algorithms and artificial intelligence have said that these are the 12 most likely for you in this particular area. Here they are. Do you want to look at them closely? Does that assist at all, Lee? Can you, or you may be able to bounce off that a bit?
Yeah, so, you know, in the same way, you know, I've obviously been watching the evolution of Wealth Migrate over the past few years. And, you know, what I see happening now is us collaborating with other real estate businesses. So, you know, not just listing a medical property, but partnering with a business that might bring 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 properties to our marketplace. Now, with tokenization, you might have, and you can very quickly just Google it, and you'll see quite a few businesses that have been formed to tokenize real estate. You know, the question is, if you sell a penthouse for 100 tokens, where do those tokens exist? How do other people get access to those tokens? How do, you know, how does somebody in Dubai buy a token for a penthouse in Manhattan, for example? And it tells me that these tokenizers, these businesses that tokenize real estate, they need to find a common marketplace where these can be traded. And, you know, can Wealth Migrate be the person or be the entity which does its due diligence and its vetting around these providers of tokenized assets, that does the due diligence around, yes, this token actually does represent a piece of real estate in Manhattan or Singapore or wherever it might be. You know, have those trusted partners that are listing the tokens with WealthE Migrate on our marketplace, and that's being traded around the world. So we're not an exchange per se. We're a marketplace for tokenized real estate.
I suppose, Lee, the end game, when it's actually hooked to the title deed office, then you don't need to worry so much about it. If you actually trust the title deed office and you can see that the ownership is linked all the way back there, and in fact, the title office has allowed 1,200 people to be digitally recognized as owners of a fraction of that particular property, then you don't have any great concern. I guess in the meantime, it's going to be transitional as to how much you can believe an intermediary that runs a register that represents that. But if you look at the stock exchange, it's not a lot different than that, in that even though they're not called tokens, shares are still a fractionalization of ownership. So if they're listed on the ASX or NASDAQ or whatever like that, people are pretty certain that if you buy a share in that company through somebody who's legitimately able to sell it, they know that they've ended up with a share in that particular company. And what's happened, I suppose, through the last few years, people have realized that how can this be broader? How can this go right down to all sorts of different asset types? And your comments really is very correct, that at the end of the day, you want to know, if I'm going to buy a 100th of apartment in New York, how do I know that that entity has got the credibility of the New York Stock Exchange or whatever, or the information flow back down and the security and the trust behind it means I am actually ending up with that apartment? And I think that's where the challenge lies, because if the regulated government entity is not willing to allow those 100 people to be on title and being able to be seen on title, and so you can immediately click a button, say, want proof that this is, you're buying 100th of an actual property, here's the government deeds office, you can go in there, you can see it. Well, that's great, but I don't think that's probably going to happen for a while. So you're going to rely on intermediaries to actually certify that they have fractionalized this building into 100 parts. Here are the things, here's the original deed, here's our evidence that this entity owns the deed, you're investing in this entity that's got 100 pieces. I think that's about as good as we can do for a while.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just, you know, I'm interested to hear from the WealthE Migrate team if, you know, is that a journey we intend to take? If so, what does it look like? You know, first mover advantage is big. You know, if you Google it online, you see lots of businesses that are fractionalizing real estate, but you don't see many marketplaces. In fact, I haven't found a marketplace. And you know, if being a marketplace in the real estate space is our, you know, that's our destination, and the real estate space is going in that direction, you know, how do we build a comfortable destination at the end of that path?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I'm going to throw over to Scott.
I think. I mean, I'll answer that. You know, very clearly in my own mind. So, firstly, Lee, I'm taking next week off because it's almost like we've kind of built this company in 5-year milestones, if you want to call it that, and we originally set a goal for 2020. We were in 2020. We've just had COVID, and it's time to have a real rethink. Now, when I say I'm taking next week off, I'm not going to Mauritius and lying in a hammock and sipping pina coladas. I'm going to just have real time to think around, like, what are the important next steps. The second thing that is critically important is that what I learned the hard way in 2017 is they always say that early adopters, you know, you've got to be careful if you're too quick, because you're the guy that gets shot with all the arrows in the back. And so what I think is really important is that you've got to be able to run a commercially viable company in the short to medium term while you are building for the where the world's going. You've got to have both. And why I say that is if you look at any of those sort of blockchain companies and where you were talking about routes to market and everything else, I agree with you. I mean, they're all there and they're doing stuff, but they're not actually getting huge traction. And that's where Willem joining us on the board as a board advisor is a significant difference, because we're getting different insights into different business models and how we can do it. I mean, Ian Hawthorne's put here, I think the first thing we need is to have an STO backed by assets in order to put a value to the token. So I agree with you 100%, Ian. I think an asset-backed token is the way. You don't want it to be able to fluctuate based on sentiment. It needs to be backed by the reality of the actual asset, which, by the way, with the WealthE coin was always the intention. The intention was always to be 20% utility, 80% security. And we've had to wait for the security exchanges and the regulators to be ready. Now, according to David Orban and a few others, who's an advisor to us in that space, is that the time's coming. Like we're nearly there now. And I think to answer your question, Lee, the reason I'm wanting to take some time out, we're having a number of very important reviews and trying to involve people's insights, including things like this, which is getting people like yourself and Paul, as insights. Is I've seen you make some comments on some of the groups. You don't see proper widespread adoption for 3 to 4 years. And I think the point being is that we've got to navigate the present, the medium term, and the long term, and not just focus on the long term and have burnout before you get there, if that makes sense. And it's that evolution. The one thing that I think is also important is that what we've realized with the meta marketplace is that under different brands, you can actually achieve different things. And so what that allows you to do is that, as an example, in the financial industry, Lemonway is a classic example for us, is that they're backed by the top 5 banks in Europe. They're protected by European regulation. They're critically important to our business. And the very word cryptocurrency would cause them to fire us. Now, it doesn't matter whether they believe in cryptocurrency or not. Their regulator and their banks, their supply partners don't like cryptocurrency. And so it's a very fine line to be an early adopter versus being able to operate within the current financial system. And I think that's a journey that any company needs to navigate. And I think what people have learned is that in 2017, it was one of these build it and they will come. And they built it and no one came. And what they've realized is they've got to be commercial while the distribution model is taking place. And that's where, for me, the meta marketplace becomes so critical, because under different brands, you can provide traditional service and you can start to employ and where Paul talks about fractionalisation and some of the things that are happening in Australia, if you've got an autonomous business unit with a separate brand, there's no reason why you can't be exploring that and not be the one's not, what's the word? It's oil and water. The one's not tainting the other, if that makes sense.
And I think the thing is, Scott, that our whole security system from the beginning has been built up on fractionalisation. Like shares, if you actually just treated everything as shares and didn't talk about tokens and things like that, and they were security tokens, but they were thought of and operated in shares. Like if you put a prospectus into ASIC in Australia to be regulated, and you are issuing shares, and at the same time you're issuing a token to match that share, then ASIC hasn't got any concerns. But if you put it in there and just say that you're going to issue a cryptocurrency or something like that, you get lots of problems. So in the beginning, I think it's very much going to have to ride on the regulatory structure that's evolved. And that's why, back in, as you said, 2017, that people had lots of utility tokens because they're still too scared to go near the regulator and try to get an asset-backed token. But really, in reality, after all of the smoke is cleared, it's the asset-backed tokens that are the ones that have come out and that people are looking at now and seeing that, okay, well, we can do this and we can build an exchange and do that.
I think, Scott, from my side, I'm definitely guilty of looking more steps ahead than is often economically viable. I also, I absolutely get that sustainability is more about today, well, a lot about today as well. But I think that if we as Wealth Migrate, have a thought process around where this environment is going, recognize it as a potential game changer, and identify what the triggers would be along the way to trigger action on our part, to trigger investment on our part, whether it's in time, money, systems, etc. That we aren't playing catch up. Does that make sense?
No, look, I think you're spot on, and I wanted to share something with you very quickly. Sorry, I'm just finding it here very quickly that I wanted to pull up, because for me, this is really the benefit of a community-driven business. And hang on, where's this bloody thing I'm looking for? Here it is. So if I share the screen quickly, is that in any community-driven business, you've got people that are passionate. You're passionate in the space. Ian Hawthorne's passionate in the space. And if you look here, I mean, we basically did this back in 2015, and it clearly needs to be updated. But if you look, there's 6 different paradigms within the wealth collaborative economy. And under the technology section, there actually was digital currency, etc. Just to your point, Lee, I think what is really valuable within a community-based business is that some people are really fascinated in this part, and others might be fascinated in another part. Due diligence as an example, and often like chalk and cheese. But equally, both of them are very valuable to growing the business. So I've learned the hard way, and Paul certainly heard me say, I tend to be 3 to 4 years ahead of where even my own team is. And you've got to be careful not to be making strategic moves that are 3 to 4 years ahead of the ability to execute. And that's often where, you've got to have a fine balance between being able to execute in the current day, but also keeping an eye on where the world's going. Because the last thing you want to do is be disrupted yourself by this whole space. I mean, it's definitely going to happen. I have absolutely zero doubt. So much so that there's a young guy that our community supports called Bongi that you've all probably heard. And I went and sat in an aptitude test with him a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. And one of the 4 careers the lady recommended to him was an estate agent. And I was like, are you joking? Like, are you looking backwards here or are you looking forwards? And I said, I can't guarantee you this is going to happen in the next 10 years, but I can guarantee you it's going to happen in his lifetime. I mean, the guy's 18 years old, his entire career, like a guarantee. And my point being is that it's definitely coming. And I think what you've said, Lee, is that almost to have these people that are fascinated by it, yourself, Paul, me, almost working as teams, and almost playing to some extent until it gets mainstream adoption. And then the next thing that I think is really important is that people like David Orban and Paul and whatever that are really tapped in on the global networks of what's happening, they are the ones that are helping us with the milestones of like, hey, this is now going mainstream. We need to get involved. I mean, Paul's been saying that now for the last probably 2 months, Paul, of what you've been witnessing in Australia and saying, hey, this needs attention now. Like, this is no longer just a couple of early adopters talking. Like, this is starting to go mainstream. I don't know if you want to talk a bit to that, Paul, and what's been happening in Australia.
Yeah, well, I just thought I'd talk first, but Wayne's written here that he foresees that tokens will be traded on exchanges like Zero, where liquidity is created in the second market, and Wealth Migrate will be in a marketplace for matchmaking to search deals and investments, and there's a distinction between the two. And I think as Lee initially asked the question, well, where is Wealth Migrate going to fit in this? And, it's whether you become an exchange that's just thousands of transactions, or whether there's an element of expertise, of trust, or whatever involved in being a matchmaker. And I think that, there's going to be a place for both types. Throughout all of history, there's always been a room for both types of things. And even today, when you can book your airline tickets online, there is always flight agents or specialists or corporate travel people. There's always people that can assist somebody that needs slightly different than a pure transaction. So that's where I think, and Scott, when you go away in your next week, and that some of those things you'll be thinking about as to how far we will be, you could say, like an informed, trusted marketplace, to where you'll just be a pure exchange, or whether you're going to be something in the middle or something, whatever. But these are very important things to think about. And thank you, Lee, for bringing that up, planting that seed.
There's a question here, and I don't know, Paul or Lee, if you want to give it a go, where I did sort of try and answer it already, but how long do you believe it will take governments to adopt blockchain? Paul, you sort of alluded to it already. Do you want to look into that a bit more?
Yeah, well, you know, after all the ICO hype and that, there were 2 or 3 small country governments that decided to put title registries and that on the blockchain, and you know, and they're working, but it hasn't moved to, you could say, towards to hint anything of mass adoption. But there is, you know, I guess it's going to be a bit like SaaS systems, whether it be for airline bookings, fee, whatever. At the end of the day, somebody's going to come along to a government and say, here's a solution that's been proven in this country and that country for all of your title registries, or it might be by city or whatever. You can install this and get going. And I think already in Australia, we're seeing where, I think in Melbourne, Victoria, you can have sort of unlimited people directly onto the title electronically. You know, that's one start. They're not using the blockchain, but they're using a digital way of solving that. It wouldn't be that much different for them to move to the blockchain, and then one city does it and then another city. So, you know, I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, there'll be a good volume of, you could say, government evidenced documentation and transactions will move to that sort of home. I don't know, Lee, you might like to answer that as well.
I mean, I don't have a clue how long it's going to take governments to adopt this. I just think that the driver being the revenue collection makes it an inevitable journey. And, you know, I think we are uniquely positioned in that we've created this global marketplace that regional exchanges can plug into and be certified by us, if you like, that, you know, you take Binance. You know, Binance is a crypto trading platform. They've moved into several jurisdictions around the world to try and take advantage of the best regulations. They have to open offices in every single hub around the world to be able to trade there. You know, it really is a massive barrier to entry for a exchange per se to become a global exchange. And, you know, we're already a global property marketplace. So it doesn't seem a stretch for me that we can allow regional property token exchanges or businesses that create and trade them, you know, access to a global marketplace. We don't want to be concerned about securing tokens. You know, we don't want to be hacked and have all the tokens finished. We want to be creating a marketplace where we can make a margin on linking buyers, sellers, and traders. That's at least how I see it.
I liked your point, Lee, where you said about the fact that at the end of the day, for governments, it's about getting money efficiently and getting paid for their position, whereby they control contracts and that. So if they can move to smart contracts and the money can automatically move from your bank account to their bank account, then they definitely, that's the motivation enough. I love that word. That's enough of motivation. And, you know, at the end of the day, that may be the thing that tilts it, when somebody gives them a system that actually does that. Like, even if here in Australia now, I see they've installed all these new machines. When you go on the bus, you just put your credit card in and it comes out of your bank account. Well, you imagine how much that eliminates in terms of efficiency. That I tap on, it comes out of my bank account and it goes into their bank account. You know, there's no accounting, there's nothing. It's you know, it's amazing. Just put a Visa card and bang, bang, that's it. And so you're right, that the motivation will come through that efficiency.
I see there was also a question around who will, you know, who will live there and who will maintain the property, etc. I mean, I hadn't really, to be honest, thought about that too much, but I don't think again it's a stretch to to have a managing agent appointed in the smart contract, and they literally receive a percentage of every rental that's paid. You know, they issue the lease, and you know, when they collect on the lease, you know, in the smart contract, their portion of managing that is automatically dispersed to them. So I don't think that's a stretch at all.
No, that's exactly how it is happening and will happen, Lee. That you're spot on there.
Yeah, and I think Paul, I remember a presentation you did when we were in Shanghai, and I can vividly remember even the room we were in, and you were talking about the evolution of stock markets and how regulation came in, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think about it, when Lynn's question is, you know, if you own 1% of an apartment, who decides who can live there and maintain it? What's the difference between that and a REIT, a real estate investment trust? You know, it's whether it's an apartment or a shopping center. You know, you're going to have a partner on the ground that is going to have to execute on the asset, whether the asset is property, real estate, private equity, or anything else. And really, just like when you know, Ken always uses that thing when you buy an umbrella on Amazon, you know, there will be social proofing around the digital record of that partner, in the same way as when you go to a restaurant, go on a flight, stay in a holiday house, whatever, around the ability for them to execute. There will always be someone that has to execute. That I don't see that ever changing.
No, I quite like your idea, Scott, of you know, just, I know the sort of the think tank idea already exists in Wealth Migrate, but you know, I quite like the idea of a little breakaway group of people that can, you know, have a discussion once a month, see where the market is, decide what the triggers are. You know, the one thing you've got to be wary of in the technology space is we actually don't know what technology is going to look like in 4 years' time. It's going that quick. So to try and plan for what technology you're going to introduce in 4 years' time, it's probably a bit foolish. I think you'll be overtaken by events anyway. But you've just got to keep your finger on the pulse. You've got to decide what size of global market would trigger our investment. What type of, you know, what size global market would encourage us to, you know, dedicate time and resource to solving this problem. You know, if we agree that that is where the property market is likely to go, at least in our lifetimes, at least in the next 10 years.
Yeah, look, I think that's extremely valuable. I think there's two ways to answer this. I definitely think like a steering team, committee, group, whatever, I think is a very valuable context. And, you know, because so many people are getting different, you know, I know Hilda Lunderstedt was at the Exponential A360 in January, and you know, she sent me videos of literally what was happening on the ground. And the nice thing is that, you know, I'm just using me philosophically, don't have to be everywhere, because if you've got a group of people that are getting information from around the world, we can bring that together, collaborate it, and then make sensible choices. That's my first comment. And my second comment is, you know, Jeff Bezos always says, you know, don't try and guess where the technology is going. Focus on the people's problems that are not going to change. So Paul, where you spoke about the efficiency of getting on the bus, the technology might have changed, but that's your problem and the government's problem of efficiency. And I think the key here is always not to try and, you know, find gadgets or things that are just nice gimmicky stuff, but actually things that are materially 10xing or improving the customer's experience or solving a problem for them. And that for me is the key.
We've got an example, a guy I met here that, you know, he worked for 7 years in going around trying to convince hospitals to plumb into their water system a machine that basically you put water in it and salt, and it's got a whole lot of coils in it, cost about $70,000, and it can make all sorts of disinfectant out of that machine. But their whole purchasing committees and everything were locked into traditional suppliers and all that type of thing. It's been approved by the FDA and by all these different organizations. January and February, when Corona started, he's been absolutely inundated. People from all over the world have been contacting him, and you can see that there's been a shift now with a particular product in a segment that just like in Australia, where people were saying, we don't want to be a cashless society, and now hardly anybody's having cash. So there will be things that facilitate this. And you're right, as Lee suggested, if you have a group from around the world that's feeding back information saying, well, this is actually what's happening on the ground here, because often we tend to think, well, this is what's happening in my country, that's what the world is all about. But you know, if we had it not only to be about a subject but to be global, then we could get input and then say, right, where are we going to be in 4 or 5 years, and how can we prepare for it now? And I think that would be valuable.
I mean, if you think about it, Paul, Gavin's asked the question with Wealth Migrate, you know, is there a use case, and are we working on the WealthE token? And the question is, we are very much so. And it's also one of these things of a hurry up and wait, which I know is very frustrating. But if you just take the people, some of the people I've mentioned today, you know, between Ken Hu and what's happening in China, you in Australia, Hilda in America, David Orban between New York and Italy, you know, you're dealing with a fairly broad-based group of individuals that have not only the passion in the space, but a huge amount of insight. And then you take the people that are on this call, yourself, Lee, myself, you know, Ian Hawthorne, Gavin, I know all these people, you know, are very passionate about it. And you've almost got a steering group of people that could keep a very good finger on the pulse of what's happening around the world, and help us make decisions. And to Gavin's point, you know, I've really taken a lot of guidance from David Orban, because he, you know, he's very actively involved in the space as to when was the right time. Because he said to me, if you do this too early, you will fail. Rather hold and wait until you do it and the market's right than trying to be too early and you have a flame out. And my other comment was just to Ian Hawthorne here. He said CBI in collaboration with the South African Reserve Bank on a consultancy basis, so they're already looking at adoption. Probably on one of the ones that South Africa has been one of the most progressive countries in the world around the whole sort of blockchain, you know, space with the Reserve Bank, etc. You know, it's certainly been one of the more progressive ones compared to others. And I think each country will go at different speeds. You know, if you look, and my experience has been crowdfunding, if you look at crowdfunding regulation around the world, it's amazing how fast some countries went and how slow and laborious other countries, you know, still are about it. You know, and that's my only real experience in this regulatory space. And Paul, you've been 10 years my senior and in 10 years more experience in it. And I just can't believe how some countries can go so fast, like England. And, you know, countries like South Africa, Australia, even to some extent America, have been so bad at getting their solutions sorted, you know.
Well, exactly. Even in Australia today, you aren't allowed to crowdfund property. You know, you think, how weird's that? And that was just one of the stipulations they put in. But should we see if there's any final questions? We're coming up to the hour here now, I see, Scott.
Yeah. I am sorry, I'm going through the questions, Paul. So I have, I think we've answered all of them, and I think I know we got to. Well, I have to close out. I've also got a board meeting now at 11. But I think what's important is that, you know, even Lynn's comment around transparency within who owns properties and all that. You know, I think that blockchain will be a game changer for governments, full stop, whether they like it or not. Because a lot of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes that, you know, none of us have transparency around will bring transparency. And I think that it's one of these things to what you said, Lee. You know, governments to some extent don't want to do it because they won't like the transparency. But I think populations will force it over the next, you know, certainly the next decade or two. So Lee Rush. Thank you. I've never had a webinar where I've got to call two Lees, but I'm used to Ken Hu and Ken Williams and whatever. But yeah, really back to you. You know, I think I just wanted to. My closing comment was to Paul and to Lee. Thank you very much for this conversation. And I know Michael Honeysett's on this call, and for me, I feel I've got a catalytic feel similar to when we had a very, you know, fun buyers trip, and Michael Honeysett keep giving me pressure to create a breakfast or a lunch. And from that, you know, we actually grew our entire wealth partner community. And I feel the same catalyst here, where it's like, wow, there's a mastermind here that are interested, that could be meeting on a monthly basis and talking about this and could add a huge amount of value to all that are interested in this community space. And I think that'll also fulfill our company needs of keeping our finger on the pulse to be able to be decisive and execute right. So yeah, I just wanted to thank Paul and Lee Taman for making, you know, being the catalyst, and Lee, for you for setting it up.
Yeah, but very welcome anytime. Thanks, Lee.
Excellent.
Thanks for putting the platform together, and I look forward to taking it further offline.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. It's been a phenomenal, awe-inspiring and information-packed webinar. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. I look forward to setting up that mastermind and getting the conversation going within our greater community. So thank you to everyone who joined us. We really appreciate your time. And just on a closing note, to remind everyone that we have our second Women and Wealth webinar tonight. So please join us as we chat to Janine Basil, who was a stay-at-home mom for 16 years and then decided she wanted to do something and give back to the community and created Acro, which is one of South Africa's biggest female venture capitalist funds now. So we look forward to that. Please join us and carry on with the conversation. Please keep your questions coming into us. We'll make sure that the guys do answer them as we get through them. Take care, be safe, and be blessed. Goodbye, everybody.